she didn't fall gracefully. There was no warning, no slow blur of vision, no dramatic cry for help. One moment, Aria Vallon was standing on platform 6 of Briarwood Station, clutching her 8-month-old son against her chest as the midday sun burned through the glass ceiling. The next, the world tilted, her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the scorching concrete with her baby still in her arms. The crowd moved around her at first, distracted by train schedules and ringing phones, unaware that a young mother and her child lay unconscious under the bright, indifferent sky. Before we go further, if you believe that kindness can change destinies and that second chances are real, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Kindness Journal. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. The station that afternoon was loud and restless. Announcements echoed through metal beams, pigeons fluttered between rafters, and vendors shouted about cold drinks and newspapers. Aria had arrived hours earlier after selling the last piece of jewelry she owned to buy a single ticket to a neighboring town. She had nowhere else to go. Her landlord had locked her out that morning, her phone service had been cut off days before, and the father of her child had disappeared long before her son, Milo, ever opened his eyes to this world. She had not eaten properly in 2 days. Every coin she had went toward formula and diapers. The heat pressed down mercilessly, and exhaustion hollowed her from the inside out. She remembered swaying slightly, trying to shift Milo higher on her hip, whispering promises to him about a better life waiting at the end of that train ride. Then everything went black. It was Rowan Hale who saw her fall. Rowan had been sitting on a bench, reviewing architectural sketches for a community project he was leading. He was not the kind of man who ignored his surroundings. Years of volunteering in shelters had trained him to notice small signs of distress, trembling hands, vacant stares, the way someone stood too still in a crowded place. When Aria crumpled, he was already on his feet before anyone else reacted. He reached her within seconds, kneeling on the concrete. Milo had begun to cry, his small fists tangled in his mother's shirt. Rowan carefully lifted the baby first, ensuring his head was supported, then gently rolled Aria onto her side. Her face was pale, lips dry and cracked, pulse faint but present. Someone called for station security, another for an ambulance, but Rowan's focus never wavered. He shaded her face from the sun with his own body and spoke softly, urging her to hold on. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and urgency. Rowan refused to let Milo out of his sight. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what he had already suspected: severe dehydration, exhaustion, and malnutrition. She would recover, they said, but she had been dangerously close to something far worse. When Aria finally opened her eyes, the ceiling above her was sterile white instead of steel and glass. Her first instinct was panic. She tried to sit up, whispering her son's name with cracked urgency. Rowan, seated quietly in the corner with Milo asleep against his chest, stood immediately and brought the baby to her. Relief washed over her face so intensely it almost hurt to witness. The days that followed were fragile and uncertain. Rowan learned her story in fragments. Aria had once been a receptionist at a small clinic, but when Milo was born prematurely, she missed too many shifts. Bills piled up. Without family nearby and no childcare, she spiraled into debt. Pride kept her from asking for help until it was too late. Rowan could have walked away after that first day. He had done his good deed. No one would have judged him for returning to his own life. But something about the way Aria held Milo, even in weakness, moved him deeply. He saw not failure, but fierce love buried under misfortune. He began by bringing meals to her hospital room. Then he offered to drive her to a temporary shelter he trusted, one run by an old friend. He made calls, pulled favors, and arranged interviews for part-time administrative work once she regained her strength. He never made her feel like a burden. He spoke to her as an equal, as someone capable, not broken. For Aria, accepting help was harder than surviving hunger. Shame wrapped around her like a second skin. Yet Rowan's kindness was steady and uncomplicated. He never asked for gratitude. He simply showed up. Day after day, under the bright daylight of ordinary life, he stood beside her while she rebuilt from ashes. Months passed. Aria found a modest job at a daycare, where Milo could stay nearby. She saved carefully, eventually renting a small studio apartment with chipped paint but wide windows that welcomed the morning sun. Rowan visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just with stories from his projects. Milo learned to recognize him, arms stretching out excitedly whenever he saw him. What began as gratitude slowly transformed into something deeper. It was in the quiet moments that it grew: shared coffee at the tiny kitchen table while Milo napped, laughter over burnt pancakes, silent understanding when old fears resurfaced. Rowan admired Aria's resilience, the way she refused to let her circumstances define her. Aria saw in Rowan a rare gentleness, strength without ego. One afternoon, nearly a year after the day at the station, they returned to Briarwood Platform 6 together. The sky was bright, the air warm but forgiving. Aria stood in the exact spot where she had fallen, Milo now toddling between them. She felt no shame this time. Only gratitude. That place, once the symbol of her lowest point, had become the beginning of everything. Rowan reached for her hand, not dramatically, not urgently, but with quiet certainty. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate proposals. Just a simple question about building a life together, about turning chance into choice. Aria said yes with tears in her eyes, not because she had been saved, but because she had been seen. They married in a small daytime ceremony in a park filled with wildflowers. The sun filtered through trees, casting soft light over friends from the shelter, co-workers from the daycare, and neighbors who had watched Aria's transformation with admiration. Milo, dressed in tiny suspenders, clapped enthusiastically, unaware that his life had once balanced on a fragile edge. Their story was not a fairy tale free of hardship. Bills still came. Arguments still happened. But the foundation beneath them was unshakable because it had been forged in a moment when kindness was the only bridge between despair and hope. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in crowded, indifferent places, compassion can rewrite someone's destiny, please take a moment to like, share, and engage with this video. Your interaction helps spread messages of hope to people who might be standing on their own platform 6 right now. And before we close, comment the word hope if you believe one small act of kindness can change an entire lifetime. Years later, Aria would sometimes watch Milo race ahead of them in the sunshine and think about that scorching afternoon. She no longer remembered the exact moment she lost consciousness. What she remembered instead was waking up to find that a stranger had chosen to care. In a world rushing past, someone had stopped. And because he did, a mother lived, a child thrived, and 2 lonely hearts found each other in the brightest hour of the day.